1979 was a significant year for all the islands of the New Hebrides. In November, the people went to the polls to decide on a government which would soon take them towards independence. The islands of the archipelago will become a new nation, unified in spite of the many different dialects and customs. In the last week of November, over 2,000 Hebrideans leave their islands to go to the host island, Efate. They'll stay in Villa for 8 days in December to take part in the first National Arts Festival. When the colonists and the traders came over 150 years ago, traditional customs started to lose their value. There were new ideas imposed on the people, new religions, new laws, new desires and needs, a different lifestyle. Now, on the verge of independence, the Arts Festival is bringing people from every island to display the strength and variety of treasured traditions, to revive and preserve part of a culture in danger of being lost, and to exchange and understand each other's customs. Father Waltalini.
Thank you too much, long you for all people, long whole country, long you me. You for especially we try hard to mass, long make him every something ready, and long make him road, long you for come long place here, long villa, long you miss have start together, long place here today, long celebrate one for the first National Art Festival. And me want them to, before me finish, say you may not forget. Say, idea belong National Art Festival. Hemi start long time where government belong Kalsaka, hemi sit down. And suppose you me all population, you me divided long politics, long political group. It got one something no more where hemi unite and you me all people belong New Hebrides. And hemia custom, culture and tradition belong you me. Make a big fella honor to us, belong declare now we are. Say National Art Festival belong New Hebrides, hemi open.
For the 8 days of the festival, the large, shady villa showgrounds were used as the main performance.
At first, there were no islands. There was only the sea. Beneath the surface, volcanoes were pushing upwards until their stark cones created a Y-shaped archipelago in the great ocean. Coral grew and gathered around the extinct volcanoes, and reefs were formed. Earth movements uplifted the reefs until they too helped make and shape the islands. The Pacific is the last area on Earth that man has occupied. People first came to these islands 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Since then, they've arrived in a series of waves from different regions at different times. There was room for all, and each migration discovered enough space to build its separate community. Melanesians were settled throughout the 80 islands with their own languages, custom and culture by the time the explorers came from Europe. De Quiros, Bougainville and then Cook scattered their alien names throughout the Pacific. In 1774, Captain Cook navigated and charted all the major islands in the archipelago. He named them the New Hebrides. The era of discovery ended with Cook. The New Hebrides was on the map, and by the 1860s, the whalers, the traders and the missionaries had got to all the islands of the group. A technically dominant culture had come in force to impose its will on the earlier arrivals. Traditional custom started to disintegrate. Old gods were being replaced. Although missionaries brought a confusion of competitive religion, they all came to spread the word of one God. Missionaries did everything they could to stop the blackbirding of indentured labour to the sugar plantations of Queensland and the Pacific colonies, but many died en route. Others perished at home as a long series of epidemics were introduced by the returning sugar workers, the white settlers and the missionaries themselves. The last resource was the land itself. The soil was rich, the rainfall reliable, and imported animals thrived and multiplied here. British and French planters bought large areas of land from the islanders, who had a very different concept of land ownership. For the native New Hebridean, land was not owned, so it couldn't be sold. Only the right to use the land and take the things it grew. One white speculator was able to acquire about 1/12 of the total land area of the New Hebrides in only 2 weeks. France saw the New Hebrides as an ideal home for liberated convicts who'd served their time in New Caledonian jails. Britain was anxious to prevent France from taking possession of the group, although she was unwilling to assume the responsibility herself. Proposals, gunboat diplomacy, missionary agitation in Australia, and counter-proposals led to an extraordinary compromise. In 1887, France and Britain set up a joint naval commission to safeguard order in the New Hebrides. Although the compromise was impossible to implement, it staggered along for 20 years until being replaced by an Anglo-French condominium, which was charged with the joint administration of the New Hebrides. Vila became the administrative centre, as well as the commercial capital, when the condominium began governing in 1906. The town grew as the governments expanded. The last British resident commissioner, Andrew Stewart, inherited the results of a tradition of over 70 years of condominium rule. Technically, the country was never a colony. It was a region of joint influence over which neither Britain nor France had any territorial sovereignty. Inspector General Robert, the last French resident commissioner, shared the responsibility of maintaining this unique form of government, of making the unworkable work. There were three forms of government. The first, a joint administration, was headed equally by both resident commissioners, and it provided most of the usual functions of government. Two other quite separate administrations protected French and British interests. Each had its own police force, prisons and courts for their own nationals. They also provided care and education. As far as New Hebrideans were concerned, the churches were the only effective administration. The great majority, the Protestants, looked to the British in their areas, and the Catholics to the French. Divisions were created as the people became influenced by the church of their allegiance, the administration that governed them, and especially by the school system that operated in their district. Many islanders are trilingual, speaking their own local language, either French or English, and Bishlamar. Through the dual education system, they absorb not only another language, but either the French or British culture and bias that controlled their society.
Alors, se rend compte au cours d'une panne d'électricité qu'il possède le don de passer à travers les murs.
Both linguistic and political divisions were growing among New Hebrideans. New words had to be invented to describe people who, in their own land, were not black Frenchmen or black Englishmen, they were francophone and anglophone.
A boy and two girls. There was a boy called Len.
Was a nice truck. You got a truck in your house? What about you? What are you doing here, boy? You're drawing a house. What about you here? What are you doing there?
It was the Protestant and later the Catholic school systems which would produce a New Hebridean educated elite. By the 1940s, the Protestants were encouraging Melanesians to become church and social leaders. From this background would emerge the future political leaders of the country. In 1942, the easygoing isolation of the islands came to an end, especially in Espiritu Santo. 100,000 United States troops were permanently stationed here until the war ended in 1945. Santo's main town changed almost overnight as a spectacular war machine turned a sleepy little European settlement into a massive forward military base. 500,000 US troops went on from here to fight the Japanese in the north. James Michener wrote Tales of the South Pacific about Santo, and John F. Kennedy skippered his patrol torpedo boat from what is now just a long wreck of broken concrete and twisted steel. The end of the war was the start of the decline of colonial influence. New Hebridean political aspirations didn't cause any real impact until 1971, when Americans were buying up large areas of land here. The land issue caused Jimmy Stevens' Nagriamel movement in Santo to present a petition to the United Nations, and quite separately, the first political party was formed. Political parties quickly developed under the banners of the return of land, unity and independence. France and Britain were forced to agree to a representative assembly, and elections followed.
Lemon. Abstention. Lini. Lini.
In November 1979, the Vanuatu party, on a platform of early independence, gained a two-thirds majority in the national representative elections. Votes are being counted now to elect a chief minister.
Nomination for chief minister, Lemang 3, abstention 3, Lini 26. As chairman of this assembly, I declare that Father Walter Lini had been elected as new chief minister for the New Hebridean government.
Vanuatu's resounding victory was no surprise, but they also won, by a narrow margin, the regional elections held on the islands of Santo and Tanna. The opposition was surprised and shocked by this. They'd expected a clear majority.
I, Walter Hedy Lini.
The regional election results set the scene for the hostilities to come. It was to be a troubled 8 months before Father Walter Lini was to lead the country to independence.
Chief Minister.
Being duly elected Chief Minister, swear by Almighty God that I will faithfully carry out the duties of my office and serve the people of the New Hebrides without partiality, fear or favor. So help me God.
The defeat in the regional elections brought about immediate opposition, frustration and anger in Santo and Tanna. Jimmy Stevens led his Nagriamel bushmen into the streets to threaten government supporters who were from other islands. The message was clear. You're foreigners. Leave Santo. Go back home, or else. Standover tactics were used in Tanna as well. Trouble flared up again in February, when Jimmy Stevens renamed Santo as the Republic of Wemarana and declared its separate independence. The following month, the government named the date of New Hebrides' independence as July 30th, 1980. There were the usual delays before it was ratified, first by the British and later, with extreme reluctance, by the French. Independence was now a reality and acted as a catalyst for the dissidents who struck again in late May. Order was restored in Tanna by the British Police Mobile Unit, but this time a well-organised and well-armed group of Santo residents, mainly French citizens, allied with Jimmy Stevens, determined to force the separation of Santo. There was plenty of help and encouragement from outside the New Hebrides. The American-based Phoenix Foundation invested at least $250,000 to supply Wemarana with a pirate radio and even its own passports, coinage and constitution.
And we said, after election on 1979, we want to tell you too, that Santo must be on Monsanto's hand. It means Santo must be staying in our custom. We vote, but doesn't matter who win the election. But we said, you go to Villa. Election for us, it's for Villa, because it's white man material. But we say we stay in the custom. We want to stay under our custom. Santo, with all the island around Santo, must be stay with Nagriamel. And on 28, custom said, no, it's a time now. We give 3-time warning, nothing done. We take back our property down where the Walter Lini's government is.
On May 28th, Jimmy Stevens declared himself president of Wemarana. Santo town was firmly in rebel hands, and only the French government facilities and police were unaffected by the secessionists. They took Santo's airport and captured the district commissioner with some of his police and officials. Government employees were terrorized, their homes and offices sacked, the British prison emptied, and English language schools closed. Rebels soon controlled all New Hebrides government services, the post office, radio, and all forms of transport. Even the old American wartime airstrips were permanently blocked and patrolled against possible retaliation. The government declared a total blockade on Santo for all aircraft, shipping and communications. Over 2,500 people were evacuated from Santo by the New Hebrides and British governments. For some, it had been the second time in less than a year that they'd left their homes, possessions and animals behind. Britain and France were still responsible for law and order up to independence, but even so, the New Hebrides government made several attempts to negotiate. Most of their efforts even to meet the rebels were rejected, and the chief negotiators, Barak Sope and Salam Malissa, were turned back several times.
We've been trying to land at the airport on Santo. Before we left, we had received word that they would give an answer at 2 o'clock for us to land. We went and flew over Santo for about half an hour. We asked for permission 3 or 4 times, but the reply we received was negative. At first, there were about 3 trucks blocking the runway. Then later, another 10 trucks joined them. We repeated our request to land, but they said no. We will try again through the radio to contact Jimmy direct. If he wants to talk, as far as the government is concerned, we are willing to sit down. If they don't want to meet us, that's their business. But as far as the government is concerned, we would like to try again.
18 days after the secession, 200 British Marines landed here. They weren't to leave Villa for over 5 weeks. A few days before, the French flew in their Garde Mobile. They stayed in Villa as well, then 27 hours later went home to Noumea. By intention or not, the effect was to demonstrate how quickly the French could mobilize a show of force. After all, New Caledonia is only an hour or so away by air. And for the British, it was a big operation to airlift troops from the United Kingdom to the New Hebrides. In Villa, as in most places, life seemed to go on as normal. Tourists wandered around, did their shopping, and tried out their new cameras over a drink at the Rossi. They visited the market, then went back to their cruise ships, wondering what the fuss was about. The New Hebrides now had a new name, Vanuatu. And the latest songs were all about independence. it was getting closer every day.
40,000 lo Vanuatu fly. More, he got 15,000 no British, more 15,000 no French flag. Where kita flag yan na, may di museum lo sanim ko lo kita island, lo every island where they ask him where lo museum lo Independence Day.
Only look nice.
Oh yes, really nice one. He got all kita t-shirt here where every size inside. Small, he got 10 inch lo 1 carton.
Tingin mo ba enough lo yun, Shallow?
More t-shirt here, everyone white color na mo. And I got small size, well big
Tingin mo ba enough lo yun?
I think may tram. May big one too much, yeah? I think big one too much. I think may tram another one.
Lucky look nice.
Two independent celebration teams are travelling throughout Vanuatu to try to reach every population centre throughout the islands. Messages are sent ahead by Radio Vanuatu for village leaders to come together to meet the teams, to ask questions and decide who will go to Vila to represent them, and where and how they will celebrate Independence Week in their own communities. David Tanarango heads the northern team. He's an Anglophone and his colleague is a Francophone. Together they can give everyone the chance to learn about independence, to see and understand the significance of their flag, hear their anthem, and know the meaning of their country's new name.
So people like come just talk to them people also on them by preparation to me because and also on them by independence me come so people government and people like come long talk with them people a little bit long side long independence.
Thank you, Thomas. Me Chief Silas. When me look out long place long district here, me happy Thomas long where you come.
Some villages have already decided amongst themselves the centres where they will celebrate. They've started to clear a site and buildings are going up to house visitors who will come from all the neighbouring villages.
I have come in the name of the government and want to hold a meeting with you. I want to talk about our independence. Our independence is coming closer. I don't represent the French government, the British government or the Vanuatu government. I have come to talk to you about our independence, how we will celebrate independence, and how independence will affect you.
Celebration of independence and also now independence. So
any more questions that you ask about politics, I will not be able to speak on it. I'm very sorry, I cannot answer.
The last resource was the land itself. The soil was rich, the rainfall reliable, and imported animals thrived and multiplied here. British and French planters bought large areas of land from the islanders, who had a very different concept of land ownership. For the native New Hebridean, land was not owned, so it couldn't be sold, only the right to use the land and take the things it grew. One white speculator was able to acquire about 1/12 of the total land area of the New Hebrides in only 2 weeks. France saw the New Hebrides as an ideal home for liberated convicts who'd served their time in New Caledonian jails. Britain was anxious to prevent France from taking possession of the group, although she was unwilling to assume the responsibility herself. Proposals, gunboat diplomacy, missionary agitation in Australia, and counter-proposals led to an extraordinary compromise. In 1887, France and Britain set up a joint naval commission to safeguard order in the New Hebrides. Although the compromise was impossible to implement, it staggered along for 20 years until being replaced by an Anglo-French condominium, which was charged with the joint administration of the New Hebrides. Vila became the administrative centre as well as the commercial capital when the condominium began governing in 1906. The town grew as the governments expanded. The last British resident commissioner, Andrew Stewart, inherited the results of a tradition of over 70 years of condominium rule. Technically, the country was never a colony. It was a region of joint influence over which neither Britain nor France had any territorial sovereignty. Inspector General Robert, the last French resident commissioner, shared the responsibility of maintaining this unique form of government, of making the unworkable work. There were three forms of government. The first, a joint administration, was headed equally by both resident commissioners, and it provided most of the usual functions of government. Two other quite separate administrations protected French and British interests. Each had its own police force, prisons and courts for their own nationals. They also provided care and education. As far as New Hebrideans were concerned, the churches were the only effective administration. The great majority, the Protestants, looked to the British in their areas, and the Catholics to the French. Divisions were created as the people became influenced by the church of their allegiance, the administration that governed them, and especially by the school system that operated in their district. Many islanders are trilingual, speaking their own local language, either French or English, and Bishlamar. Through the dual education system, they absorb not only another language, but either the French or British culture and bias that controlled their society.
Alors, se rend compte au cours d'une panne d'électricité qu'il possède le don de passer à travers les murs.
Both linguistic and political divisions were growing among New Hebrideans. New words had to be invented to describe people who, in their own land, were not black Frenchmen or black Englishmen, they were francophone and anglophone.